achieved.
Welcome back to Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. As always, I am your host, Scott Johnson, and on this edition of the show, we're taking a look at UFC On FX Johnson vs. McCall, which will take place on June 8th, 2012, from the Bank Atlantic Center in Sunrise, Florida. Now, there are 12 fights in the card. I'm giving predictions for 9 fights. A couple fights I'm just going to pass on because I don't know enough about the fighters, and I don't have the time to look up these undercard fights and figure out who's going to win, and I'm never going to give you a prediction where I'm just guessing. Never do that. Other guys might. I will not. Now, I had mentioned before my wife was pregnant, May 28, 3:43 in the afternoon. She gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, Lucas Evan Johnson. Both mom and baby are at home now and doing just wonderful. I couldn't be happier to be a father. It's an exciting time ahead for myself and my wife and our young son, and all the grandparents and aunts and uncles as well. Now, I wasn't able to do an Ultimate Fighter video as a result. I posted the predictions on the website, did my best there. Got some help from Joe Caporelli, my Bellator predictor, who did an excellent job breaking down the preliminary fights. Combined, we went 6-4 overall. He had a better night than I did, but I did pick off the Martin Kampmann main event upset. Fantastic fight there, so I was pretty happy with that. Now, the bet pack for that event was posted free on my website. I only did 5 fights myself, so I broke the bet pack down there. Did it free. I think I made some people some money because I had some solid investment advice. For UFC On FX, bet pack will be available at kamikazeoverdrive.net. Again, only $5. I've added a confidence list. I had the confidence list before for who I think is going to win straight up. I've added another list, which is a value bet list based on what they're paying and the possibility of them winning. I've ranked as a different list. You'll have to check it out to see the explanation on the website there, but certainly worth it. For the next event, the end of the month, I think I'm going to be raising the prices at that point, but I'm also going to be putting together a monthly package where you can buy the entire month's worth of bet packs for a cheaper price per event. As always, thank you very much to my sponsors, MMABettingOdds.com, CouchFighter.co, MMACrips.com, the Adrenaline Training Center in London, Ontario. Thank you very much to all of them. Greatly appreciate your support for hosting and posting my videos, and really any video or any site that hosts my videos. Thank you very much as always. I think that's enough for me. I think it's time now to get into my first prediction. Alright, my first prediction of the night is in the welterweight division. I'm going to try and keep this short. 11-3-0, Jake the Hitman Hesh takes on 11-6-0, Sean the Punisher Pearson. Coming into this bout, Hesh is coming off a submission loss to TJ Wahlberger, while Pearson has lost back-to-back fights to Dong Young Kim and Jake Ellenberger. I really like Jake Hesh for a couple reasons. He's the younger fighter. Pearson has some issues with some conditioning. He picked up an early win against Matt Riddle in his debut, which was questionably faded in that fight, and Riddle kind of took it over. Where Hesh, he didn't look great against Rich Antonito, but Antonito was a pretty decent grappler. Controlled him early in the first round until Hesh stopped him with elbow shots, and Wahlberger caught Hesh with a submission, which was very impressive. Look for Hesh in this fight to use his wrestling a little more effectively than we've seen so far, put Pearson on his back, grind him out for the duration of the fight, really tax his conditioning late, and I think Jake Hesh picks up a decision victory. So I'll take Jake Hesh over Sean Pearson by decision. For the next preliminary fight, we move to the UFC's bantamweight division as tough alumni Dustin Page, 10-6-0, takes on Jared the Jackhammer Papazian, 14-7-0. Jackhammer, love it. Taking a quick look at what they've done recently. Papazian debuted and took on the heavy-handed and dangerous Mike Easton and went the full 3 rounds against Easton, which was impressive. Dustin Page, on the other hand, debuted after coming off the tough alum stint with a TKO loss to John Albert. What this fight prediction comes down to for me is toughness. Dustin Page really did not show me a ton of toughness in his debut against Albert. Albert locked up the gift wrap and pounded him out with the TKO. He just seemed to overwhelm Page. We saw that a little bit on The Ultimate Fighter as well. While on the other hand, Jared Papazian is a tough dude. He has some issues with submission defense. He's been tapped out 4 times, and Page does have 7 wins by submission. But I think Papazian did an excellent job against Mike Easton, stood there and traded shot for shot with him, hit him with some hard shots, took some hard shots, and I think that's what this fight comes down to. He has 5 wins by knockout, so my prediction is Jared Papazian to defeat Dustin Page by knockout or TKO, one or the other, but Papazian walks away with the victory. We move over to the UFC's featherweight division as the always entertaining Leonard Bad Boy Garcia, 19-8-1, takes on the real one, Matt Grice, 14-4-0. Garcia's coming off back-to-back losses to the Korean Zombie and Nam Fan, 2 guys he had beat originally in controversial decisions, who came back and reclaimed victories in their second meeting. Matt Grice returned to the UFC and was defeated via head kick by Ricardo Lamas. So both guys very desperate for wins. out there, Leonard Garcia potentially one of the most entertaining fighters in all of the UFC, but entertaining doesn't always equate to victories. He's the type of guy who will go out and he throws huge bombs, and he throws them with reckless abandon, he looks to brawl, and yes, it's entertaining, but it's not overly efficient. And Greg Jackson has done his best to reel him in and make him a more technical fighter, and he has recently started off fights in that style, but he breaks down eventually. His cardio begins to fail. He throws these big looping punches, doesn't land enough, and the big concern when you look at it is in his career, I think he's fought 24 times. He only has 3 wins by knockout, so though he throws with power, he doesn't land enough to hurt opponents. Matt Grice, on the other hand, is a wrestler at base. He comes in with 6 wins by knockout, 4 by submission. Now, he has been knocked out twice, so there's an opening for Garcia there. But Grice was a heavily recruited high school wrestler, very successful, went on to a college career, was cut short when he was in a car accident. Now he's gone. Now we're back in MMA. He started off his UFC career at lightweight. He struggled there. He did pick up a win. He's down at featherweight now. I expect what we're going to see from him is he's going to come into this fight, use his wrestling, ground Garcia, grind him out, work on his conditioning. You might not have to do that if he can avoid the strikes of Garcia. Garcia's conditioning may fail on its own, and I think Matt Grice, picks up a decision win. So I'm going to take Matt Grice to defeat Leonard Garcia by decision. Now we head over to the UFC's welterweight division. Zeth Basinski, 15-6-0, takes on 6-0 undefeated Lance Benoist. Now, coming into this fight, Basinski has picked up back-to-back UFC wins over Clay Harvison and Matt Brown, both by submission, while Lance Benoist debut with a unanimous decision win over Matt Riddle. Now, what this fight comes down to for me is Basinski is a mountain of a man. Comparing the physical attributes, he's 6'3", bordering on 6'4". For a welterweight, that's huge against 5'11" Benoist. Another thing, so that's a big size advantage for Basinski, and he uses it well. He does not a lot of work in the clinch game, and he's able to ground his opponents. He attempts a lot of takedowns, and that'll wear out a lot of welterweights who are dealing with a size mismatch. Now, Lance Benoist, another big thing for him, he is undefeated. He's only fought 6 times professionally. He has a good amateur record, but compared to Basinski, who's fought 21 times, Basinski has a huge experience advantage, and I think that shows up here. Benoist is a dangerous striker. We've seen him with some decent work on the ground. Overall, he has 1 win by knockout, 4 wins by submission. Against Riddle, he got taken down and controlled early and got controlled in the clinch, but he was able to reverse on the ground. But the big thing with Basinski, I think he's going to use his clinch, push Benoist into the cage, put him on the mat, grind him out, beat him up, and I'm going to take Zeth Basinski to defeat Lance Benoist by submission. Continuing the UFC welterweight division, 13-5-0, Mike Pierce takes on the returning Carlos Eduardo Rocha, 9-1-0. Now, Pierce is coming off a tough split decision loss against Josh Koscheck at UFC 143 that I felt he won that fight, and I picked him to win the fight, so I was just as disappointed as he was. Now, Carlos Eduardo Rocha, back at UFC 126, also lost a split decision, this time to Jake Ellenberger. But that was back in February 2011, so let's start right there. He's been out of action for over a year, which is a major concern when predicting a fight, because you don't know how a fighter returning from such a long layoff will look in the cage. One big thing, though, with Eduardo Rocha, he's got 8 wins by submission in 10 total fights. 9 wins, 8 of which by submission. That's very impressive. He gave Jake Ellenberger all kinds of trouble on the ground. Every time the fight went to the mat, Rocha was threatening with submissions, and very well could have won that fight on the basis of that. He slowed down a little bit in the second half, which essentially cost him that matchup against Ellenberger, but the guy is dangerous. Mike Pierce is a wrestler. He's won the majority of his fights by knockout, though. He has some heavy hands. And I look at this fight, and I look at the Ellenberger-Rocha fight, and it really gave me cause for concern in the sense that I really considered taking Rocha based on his ability to control fighters on the mat and use his submission fighting. But his cardio is a concern. Mike Pierce has cardio for days. He will just go, 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 and the guy hits hard. Pierce is going to have a significant striking advantage. He has the ability to put hands on guys with significant power. Carlos Eduardo Rocha, he's been out of the game, so his striking could have improved, but I don't like his chances if he can't get this fight to the mat. Returning to Ellenberger-Rocha, the big thing that stands out for me in that matchup is Rocha went 0 for 5 in takedown attempts. On the other hand, Ellenberger went 3 for 5. So what that's telling me is Rocha wasn't able to get his opponent to the ground. He had to rely on Ellenberger to take it down. And I look at Mike Pierce, and I have to think Mike Pierce is going to be smart enough to keep the fight off the mat from taking it down on his own, and his takedown defense comes in ranked at 72%. Koscheck had all kinds of trouble getting him to the mat, and when he got him there, had trouble keeping him there. So I think Mike Pierce keeps this fight standing, uses his heavy hands, and I'm going to take Mike Pierce to defeat Carlos Eduardo Rocha by knockout. We move on to the first of 4 main card fights. We're in the bantamweight division as former WEC bantamweight champion 18-8-1 Eddie Wineland takes on Scott Young Guns Jorgensen 13-5-0. Jorgensen coming up a loss to Enan Barao, which snapped a 2-fight winning streak. Eddie Wineland comes into this matchup on back-to-back losses to start his UFC career. He lost to Uriah Faber. He lost to Joseph Benavidez. Those are 2 of the top guys in the division. Benavidez obviously fighting at flyweight now. I was really hoping that Wineland would get an opportunity to fight against a more appropriate opponent instead. And of course, originally was linked to Johnny Bedford in this fight, but that fight got changed. And now he's facing Scott Jorgensen, another top 10 fighter, another wrestler. And essentially, that's what this matchup comes down to. You have Scott Jorgensen's wrestling against Eddie Wineland's striking. Wineland with 9 wins by knockout. Jorgensen has 4 wins by submission and 7 wins by decision, where he takes his opponent down and blankets it. Now, we've seen the struggles that Jorgensen had against Enan Brown, Dominic Cruz in fights where he wasn't able to establish his wrestling, get his opponents down with regularity, and keep them there. He got picked apart on the feet and couldn't implement his wrestling. Jorgensen's striking not nearly as bad as people make it out to be. It's definitely serviceable. Not on the level of Brow or Cruz. I don't think on the level of Eddie Wineland either. Wineland has some excellent combinations. He's got some slick footwork. And he's got power, obviously, with 9 wins by knockout. Prior to starting with the UFC, he knocked out Ken Stone with a slam, stopped Will Campazano with a body punch. Those are tough things to do when you're fighting at the elite level. So I like Wineland's striking. Now, of course, as I said, if Jorgensen gets this fight to the ground, he's going to grind Wineland out for 3 rounds and win a decision. If Wineland keeps it standing, he has a very good chance to win this fight. And one thing I look at, in his 2 UFC fights, his takedown defense has looked excellent. Against Faber, he stopped 9 of 11 takedown attempts. Against Joseph Benavidez, he stopped all 6, combining for 2 for 17 for those 2 men looking for takedowns. I don't think Jorgensen's on the level of Benavidez or Faber. The difference there was Faber and Benavidez have pretty good striking, were able to rely on their speed and quickness to outpoint Wineland. And one thing, Eddie Wineland's definitely slowed down in the Faber fight, which gave Faber the opportunity to catch up and eventually win a decision late. Against Benavidez used his speed effectively, and he caught Wineland with an overhand right that cut him open. He also broke his nose up a little bit, and as a result, Wineland was distracted and bothered by that. I don't think Jorgensen has the ability with his striking to hurt Wineland to that extent. And the way I look at this, most people are supporting and expecting Scott Jorgensen to win this fight. I'm going to go off the board. Eddie Wineland's going to keep this fight standing early, use his reach advantage of 3 inches and his height advantage of 3 inches, outpoint Scott Jorgensen, do a better job with the striking, use his takedown defense, and win a couple of rounds. So I'm going to take I'm going to take Eddie Wineland to defeat Scott Jorgensen, probably by decision, potentially by split decisions. We're back in the UFC's welterweight division as Mike Quicksand Pyle, 22-8-1, battles Josh the Dentist Neer, 33-10-1. Pyle is coming off an impressive victory over Ricardo Funch, where he stopped him via TKO. Well, Josh Neer, a technical submission and a TKO win over Duane Ludwig and Keith Wisniewski in his 2 fights since coming back to the UFC. He's looked very good. These are 2 very good, well-rounded fighters. Overall, both men have the majority of their wins by... both have a lot of wins by submission. Josh Neer has 12 wins by submission. Pyle has 16. But the big number that stands out to me is Josh Neer, 17 wins by knockout compared to Mike Pyle's 3. So Neer, easily the more well-rounded fighter based on win totals alone. Now, this is a tough fight to call. Both men are well-rounded. They have a lot of experience. They're just top-notch welterweight veterans that are going to put on a good show when they both come to fight. What I look at coming into this is Josh Neer has had difficulties when matched up with opponents that can take him down and put him on his backside. Against Josh Burke, when he suffered 4 takedowns, lost the fight. Nick Diaz, 3 takedowns, lost the fight. Nate Diaz, 5 takedowns, lost the fight. Kurt Pellegrino really stands out to me, 3 takedowns, but he smothered Neer for the duration, really frustrated him, and Neer lost the fight. And finally, Gleison Tebow, 11 takedowns, he lost the fight. Mike Pyle's the type of guy where if he can get on top of you, he's going to grind you out, he's really going to work you over in the fight. On his side of things, actually 2 fights that really stand out here. His win over John Hathaway, 5 takedowns, he put Hathaway in his back, kept him there, negated Hathaway's striking, and really frustrated the Brit on his way to a decision. And against a very talented grappler, Ricardo Almeida, he used 1 takedown, put him on the ground, beat up Almeida, won the striking exchanges, and for the most part, he showed he's an improving fighter. He's lost 2 fights, but you look at those 2 fights he's lost recently against Rory McDonald and Jake Ellenberg, 2 of the top fighters in the welterweight division. No shame in that. Against McDonald, he actually took him down twice and was looking pretty good until he got caught and pounded out on the ground. So I like Pyle in that sense. I really like Josh Neer's fighting style. For an entertainment sake, he's an aggressive fighter who's in your face. But the problem with Neer is I don't think he fights overly smart. He was standing and trading with Duane Ludwig until he got hurt. Against Keith Wisniewski, same thing, standing and banging with Wisniewski until he eventually got the stoppage. But you can tell he was taking some damage and, got dinged a couple times, which is certainly a concern. The way I look at this is I think Mike Pyle is going to be smart. He's going to try and look to get on top of Neer. Both guys are BJJ brown belts, so they should be able to match, but I like Mike Pyle overall to use his wrestling, put Neer on his backside, and frustrate the Dentist for the duration of the fight in similar fashion to what other fighters have done in Neer's past. So I'm going to take Mike Pyle to defeat Josh Neer by decision. We continue for our 5th and final welterweight matchup as Erik Silva, 13-2-0 with 1 no contest, takes on always tough veteran Charlie the Spaniard Brenneman, 15-3-0. Now, Erik Silva is coming off a disappointing disqualification loss against Carlo Prater back at UFC 142. He dropped Prater right off the bat in the fight, followed him in for the finish with hammer fist, potentially caught him with a couple to the back of the head. Mario Yamasaki saw enough that he could disqualify Silva. As a result, he suffered a loss. Charlie Brenneman, on the other hand, coming off a 3-round decision victory over Daniel Roberts. The UFC opting to pick a winner with a loser, is simply because they're treating Silva like he won that fight against Prater despite suffering the DQ loss. Now, Erik Silva, the guy's got dynamite in his hands, no question about it. His knockdown of Prater. Prior to that, in his debut, he defeated Luis Ramos, knocked him out in 40 seconds. Very impressive. The guy is a finisher. He's finished 10 of 16 total fights. But the thing is, only 3 of those by knockout, 7 wins by submission. The guy's a BJJ black belt, but we have yet to see him on the ground as he hasn't fought in a fight that lasted longer than a minute in the UFC. So interesting to see if this fight goes to the ground, and there's a very good chance it could. Charlie Brenneman comes in. He's a wrestler. He's a blue belt in BJJ, so he's capable of handling himself there. He only has 2 wins by submission. His bread and butter is his ability to take fighters the distance and grind them out. 8 wins by decision. That's what he did to Daniel Roberts. A couple fights prior, he did the same thing to Rick Story. He outworked Story, used his hustle, put Story on his backside, and kept him there and ground out the 3-round decision victory. It was very impressive. It really derailed Rick Story's hype train. Now, how do these two match up? Silva will have the advantage with the striking, and Brenneman being knocked out twice, he's going to have to be very careful to avoid that quick flash knockout. But taking a quick look at Charlie Brenneman's past history, in his last 12 fights, his 2 losses, both by knockout, came against Johnny Hendricks and Anthony Johnson, 2 big, strong wrestlers who were able to defend the takedowns of Brenneman. Johnson only had 1 takedown stuff against Brenneman. Hendricks saw 4 takedowns come his way, stuffed 2 of them, and caught him with a quick knockout in the second round. So what this fight comes down to for me is, can Erik Silva keep the fight vertical? Because that's a big issue. If Charlie Brenneman is able to implement his ground game and take Silva down, he's going to win this fight, and he's going to be the underdog, and he's going to pay significantly if he wins. Silva has not gone past the opening minute and a half of a fight since all the way back in October 2010. His 2 UFC flash victories, and then his final fight in Jungle Fight, the Jungle Fight organization, he only took him a minute 7 to win by armbar. If he gets put on his back and cannot get back up or cannot threaten with submissions against Brenneman, he will be in trouble. And when I look with Brenneman, he has excellent top control. Against Daniel Roberts, a very skilled black belt, he was able to keep Roberts on his back and grind out the decision win. And that's what he's going to look for here. Silva's cardio is questionable, and I'm not just saying that simply because he hasn't gone very far in his last 3 fights. Going back earlier in his Jungle Fight career, I saw some matchups where his opponent was able to push the fight into the later stages, and Silva was noticeably gassing. And against a guy like Charlie Brenneman, if you're getting worn down, you are losing that fight. Brenneman will outwork you, he'll put you on your back, he will make you work for the duration, and he's going to tax your endurance. And I really like Charlie Brenneman. My initial thought was, Silva by knockout, but I'm not going that direction now. Brenneman comes into this fight, he averages almost 4 takedowns per fight, completes 50% of his attempts. So if he is able to get off 5 or 6 takedown attempts, he's going to put Silva on his back, and he's going to tax his endurance. So my prediction in this matchup is Charlie Brenneman to defeat Erik Silva by decision. We move on now to my main event prediction in the UFC's flyweight division, as Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson, 14-2-1, takes on Uncle Creepy Ian McCall, 11-2-1. Of course, this is, as I said, in the flyweight division. The winner of this matchup will go on to face Joseph Benavidez to crown the UFC's first ever 125-pound champion. And this, as I said, this fight originally took place on March 3rd, 2012. It was a decision that was granted to Demetrious Johnson on the initial reading, and he was my prediction to win by decision. But it turned out a scoring error resulted in this fight being called a draw, which robbed us of a potentially very exciting and fantastic 4th-round sudden death. And that's another thing to keep in mind here. Even though it's a main event, because it's a tournament final fight, it's a rematch. This is only 3 rounds. If it's a draw like the last one was after 3, we will see a fourth sudden death tiebreaker round. That'd be great if we got there. I think it'd be very exciting. Now, looking at these 2 fighters, both men impressed me in the last fight, but the big thing that stood out to me was the speed issue. Demetrious Johnson was a title challenger and very effective and successful at bantamweight because of his speed. We saw it against Miguel Torres, we saw it against Kid Yamamoto, and even against Dominic Cruz. He really gave Cruz all kinds of trouble with his speed. Now dropped down to flyweight against other guys who are a little bit smaller and faster, and suddenly that advantage is gone. We saw it with John Dodson against Timothy Elliott. Elliott did a nice job against Dodson, who usually is able to overwhelm his opponents with his speed. Johnson, the same thing against Ian McCall. suddenly these former bantamweight fighters who are used to using their speed have to deal with not having this in their repertoire. I would say Ian McCall was as fast as Demetrious Johnson, if not a little bit faster, and I think that was a shock to some people because Mighty Mouse has long been considered one of the fastest men in the UFC, so that was a big issue. Additionally, Ian McCall did a nice job with his power. I'd say I gave him the power edge against Johnson. Johnson, his quantity of strikes was impressive. He had a lot of success attacking McCall with a series of flurries of hooks and punches. Did so off takedown attempts that were unsuccessful and attacked him. And he actually hurt McCall in the first round with a quick shot. But overall, I'd say McCall had Johnson backing up for the duration with his strikes. And finally, wrestling. And this is something that was very interesting to me. Again, Johnson used to be dominant with his takedowns. Johnson was unable to complete any takedowns in this matchup, where McCall put Demetrious on his backside on multiple occasions and kept him there. And it was very impressive when he did so. He did a nice job, and he moved to advance to some controlling positions, including taking his back on several occasions. And we saw at the end of the fight, they're getting on his back and just wailing away with ground shots, playing to the crowd where instead of maybe if he cranked up the intensity, he could have ended that fight. Either way, I was impressed with Ian McCall. Demetrious Johnson did everything I expected him to do, except for, of course, using that speed, which McCall took control of. The way this fight comes down to me is I felt Ian McCall won that first matchup. Like I said, I picked Demetrious Johnson, was disappointed after the fight, and then when I heard Johnson won, I was kind of disappointed with the decision because I felt Ian McCall did enough to win that fight. If it was a draw, that's great, but Demetrious Johnson I don't think should have left with the victory either way. So I think McCall is going to be able to use his wrestling again, put Johnson down, land better strikes more efficiently. I'm sure Johnson can come with a different game plan, but again, it's hard to make up when you lose that element that you've had, that speed advantage you've had for almost your entire career. It's almost like a heavyweight or a knockout artist who's had a granite chin and been able to take fighters' biggest shots to deliver their own for their entire career, and suddenly it disappears, and you can't take shots anymore and you can't win. Now Demetrious Johnson, who's been used to outspeeding opponents for his entire career, suddenly that disappears, and it's a very significant change in the way he fights his fights. Either way, this should be a fantastic matchup. I think the big thing is McCall lands with power and is able to use his wrestling to put Johnson on the mat, defend the takedowns from Johnson, control him on the ground. So I'm going to take Ian McCall. I think it's still a little bit of an upset. Ian McCall to defeat Demetrious Johnson by decision and advance to the finals to face Joseph Benavidez. So those are my predictions for UFC on Effects, Johnson versus McCall. You can check out the bet packs, which will be available at kamikazeoverdrive.net for $5. Please consider investing in lots of fantastic information. I usually post now an example or two on the website, so take a look at those, and if you really feel that you can gain from it, I think you can. Certainly put the $5 down. As this is the last time they'll be $5. The next event, they will be going up in price as well, because I put so much work into it. I do a lot of research, fight-by-fight betting breakdowns based on the odds. I try and break things down and explain. Maybe I didn't predict this fighter to win, but he certainly has value based on the price that has been put beside his name. So either way, I'm hoping UFC on Effects is a better night than I've had the last little bit. I've been improving. Lost a couple of close ones, lost a couple of tough ones. Either way, I'm looking forward to this event. It should be a fantastic night of fights. As always, thank you for listening. Kamikaze Overdrive MMA Predictions. I'm Scott Johnson. Take care.